So I was looking at the Old Testament. I was doing a little study guide on the Old Testament today, and I was looking at the Amalekites, and something occurred to me. A couple of my videos I've talked about, there's these debates that people have over the contested parts of the Old Testament in particular, like, for example, God's treatment of the Amalekites. And then in other earlier videos, I would talk a lot about metaphorical truths in the Bible in a sort of vaguely Peterson-esque sort of way. There are truths in the Bible, and you need not see the Bible as inerrant. You can read the Bible as a practicing atheist or practicing agnostic and derive great value and insight from it. There are metaphorical truths. And it occurred to me, and I've said this in the past, but I believe that this is true, that metaphorical truths and spiritual truths are basically the same thing. Because when I was thinking about the Amalekites, there's a couple of scams that go on here in the atheist community when it comes to the awfulness of the Old Testament. It's a bit of a scam, especially because a lot of these people actually came out of Christian traditions. And I was a practicing Christian, as the practicing Christian 8, 9, 10 years ago when I was first going to church. Most of the teachings in the actual church, if you are a practicing Christian, which means I live my life, and a sincere one, which means I honestly, prayerfully consider the Bible, and I pray a lot, and I try and reconcile myself to the promptings of the Holy Spirit, and try and live my life being led by the Spirit, and trying to be an actual practicing Christian, And I go to church, and I fellowship with other believers, and in actual church, actual Christianity is a lived experience as opposed to these academic questions about Christianity. Nobody talks about the Amalekites. And if they do, it's one lesson and one lesson only that I've ever heard in that context. And it's the one about Moses standing on the hill. This is the only lesson I have ever heard used. Well, there's only about 5 or 6 lessons I've ever heard used in a church in the context of actually preaching to a congregation from the Old Testament. And reality check. Call the media. God's treatment of the Amalekites isn't right up there on page, on like the most prominent sermon you'll ever hear. Matter of fact, you'll never hear it. There's 4 or 5 messages that I've heard in the context of the Old Testament as a practicing Christian. This is where I'm going with this. One of which is Moses has his hands raised, and when Moses is praying, they're winning, and then Moses' arms fall and they start losing, and then somebody puts his hands under Moses, and the message there, and I believe this is a message from T.D. Jakes actually, hands up under the man with his hands up. You have to be a supporting player in a church, something like that. A metaphorical truth. By the way, that's why I brought it up. A metaphorical truth. A metaphorical truth. That's what a practicing Christian, a pretty well-known preacher, was preaching on in relationship to the Old Testament. The other things I've heard from the Old Testament, the giants in the earth. We went into the promised land, we spied giants, and we ourselves were like, we ourselves became small in their sight. I've heard a message on that. A metaphorical truth. Hello? A metaphorical truth. We saw these big giants in the land and said we can't overcome. And the message, that one 50 times out of 50 is usually God is bigger than your giants. And if you see God is bigger than your problem, you can overcome the problem. If you see the problem is bigger than you, then you can't. Metaphorical truth pointing you towards the basic paradigm of success, actually. Basic human psychological paradigm of success. Henry Ford, not in any Christian context, said basically the same thing. If you think you can, if you think you can't, you're right. Think about it. If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. There's some amount of faith creates its own reality. Faith overcomes and moves mountains. In secular, rationalist, humanistic terms, you can understand that basic metaphor. If you aren't handling all things related to faith, religion, spirituality in a way that's just ignorant and plain dumb. On purpose. Usually on purpose. The idea that you were practicing Christian and you had some outrageous amounts of cognitive dissonance is probably not true. Why? Because nobody is teaching on those particular contested parts of the Old Testament. You went digging for them. Prior to the advent of atheism and anti-theism as a public thing, Those were relatively esoteric parts of the Bible. There's really, really famous, well-known parts of the Bible, and there's relatively esoteric, unknown ones. Those relatively esoteric, unknown ones are becoming more famous. Why? Because the anti-deists and the atheists bring them up all the time, as if they're the only thing in the Scripture. You listen to Aaron Ra talk about the Bible, you'll think it's a primer on how to sell slaves. You'll think the entire Old Testament is a handbook on slavery. I swear to God, you listen to these people. You will honest to God think, hey, what they did, even with the Old Testament endorses slavery. There's 5 scriptures we're dealing with? Exodus 22, 23? 5? They act like, Exodus itself, the book of Exodus itself, it starts off like, if you have slaves, here's how to package your slaves, and here's what you should sell your slaves for. As if the entire book is a primer on selling slaves. There's a whole story in the book of Exodus. You got that, right? Whole story with tons of really, really deep spiritual insight. Matter of fact, take Christianity out of it. The book of Exodus is probably the central paradigm of the entire Jewish culture and religion and nation. And there's 6,100 really rich, deep, intelligent metaphors to be had, none of which are the selling and trading of slaves and how you treat slaves. There's a whole metaphor, actually, interestingly enough, about slavery. Yeah, paradox of paradoxes. Yeah, true. Swear to God, it's about slavery. Delivery from bondage. That's metaphorical truth paradigm number 1, central narrative of the Jewish people. Delivery from bondage. It's what Passover is all about. It's what Passover is all about. Central religious ritual of Judaism. Central metaphor for the entire religion of Judaism. Deliverance, God's sovereign hand and delivery from bondage. Now, in Christian context, I've heard that talked about a lot. Egypt. That's what they'll say. Egypt. God's bringing you out of your Egypt. And I've also heard talked a lot in Christian contexts. It's a basic day-to-day reality in Christian communities. You say I'm really struggling in my marriage. I'm really struggling in my career. Some will say, oh, you're having a wilderness experience. And they're using the metaphor of the children of Israel walking through the desert. A wilderness experience. It's a deep, rich, important metaphor. And in that particular wilderness experience, there's 100 different really interesting things going on. And there's all sorts of really rich, really intelligent metaphorical truth buried in just that little passage. It's not just about the buying and selling of slaves. I honest to God think, ask Dr. Josh, I don't know for a fact and I'm not going to examine it tonight, but I honest to God think the particular scriptures in question in Exodus, I really think it's only Exodus 22 and 23. I think there's only 2. Maybe there's a few more. And maybe a couple in Leviticus. But there's a lot of really interesting, really powerful things going on within the text. And as a secular person, as a person who is not a committed Christian or not a committed anything, an atheist / agnostic, you can read the Old Testament and get a lot from the passages in Exodus. And I realized when I was talking about this in the past that I started talking about man in the wilderness. Probably a lot of you don't even know what I was talking about. So in the past when I've talked about metaphorical truths in the Old Testament, okay, the central metaphor of the book of Exodus, I realized, I made that video in the past, and I realized probably when I was doing my little study on it today that probably people don't even know it well enough to know what I was talking about. So the central metaphor for the book of Exodus as a whole, they have been delivered out of bondage and they are headed towards the promised land. That is a really big metaphor for the land that God has promised you. In a broader context, you can say your destiny in life, the thing that you were born to do, the land of promise. So I likened it to if you were building a company or starting your own company. And you believe, as a practicing Christian, we prayerfully consider our lives and we feel like God said, build a company. That's how a lot of Christians actually live. God said, build a company. I really feel like the Lord has led. That's why they do missionary work some of the times. Not all of them. Some of them are full of it. But some of them are actually think that I really feel like God pushed me to go do X and that's why I'm doing it. There are actual people who have beliefs that are that sincere, that they are living out for real. I promise, there really are. Not all of us are just faking it. We're not. There are people as we speak who are doing missionary work because they honest to God believe that God called them to do it, that God prompted them to do it. And there is such a thing in the Christian experience as The promised land in Christianese means you're building a company. That's the thing that God has ordained you to do for your life. So you're trying to be Steve Jobs. You're the next Steve Jobs. Or the next Craig Reed YouTube channel king. I don't know. It's my company. No, it's not good. It's terrible. It's good. I thought it was good. It's a good title for my channel. You know, you guys are so fussy. So freaking fussy. I can't even believe it. So, you're building your company. Now, this is the central metaphor in the book of Exodus. It's the central metaphorical truths of the book of Exodus. You are building your company. And in between where you stand today and the thing that God has promised, which is the fulfillment of, you know, your hopes and vision for this company. It's going to be this really successful company. You're going to be selling gadgets and gizmos. What did I say in the last video? Gizmos and gadgets to dingbats for a lot of money. A lot of money in it. A lot of money in selling gizmos and gadgets. You know, a lot of stupid people, and you're gonna take them for everything they're worth. Oh, it's corrupt. All right, well, whatever. Roll with it. So it's a little corrupt. I didn't say it was like, all right, fine. It's not corrupt. It's a great company, and you're selling ice cream to handicapped kids. How's that? That's your company. You're selling ice cream to handicapped kids, and there's very little money on it, but it's really rewarding because you're really helping these handicapped kids. How's that? Is that better? That's a better company? Okay, yeah, that's a lot better, Craig. It's a lot more. All right, fine. Now, shut up. I'm going somewhere with this. Interrupting my train of thought. So, you're going to build a company. That's what you think God spoke into your spirit. God said, build a company. Spoke that into your spirit. So now, you have 4 employees. Okay? And in between today and the realized vision, the realized goal, you will have what we in the Christian community call a wilderness experience. That's what they had in the desert. And the things that happen in the desert are the same things that will probably happen to you. That's how insightful the darn book is. Whether you are an atheist, a secular person or not, this is the God's honest truth. The same things that beset the children of Israel in their wilderness experience are some of the same things that will beset you when you are building your company. So don't tell me it's an idiot book from 2,000 years ago that's got nothing to say in today's terms. Because the things that are going to befall and beset them that they needed to overcome, same things you're going to need to overcome. Hello, reality check. There's a reason why it stood the test of time. There's a reason why it's here 2,000 years later and we're debating it. Because it has been one of the key cornerstones of Western civilization. Hello, no, it's just a dumb book of fairy tales. No, that's the dumbest possible take I could possibly ever hear. You should be embarrassed that that even comes out of your mouth at this point. Because the only thing that exposes your own ignorance. Promise. Promise. So, where am I going? Where was I? Okay, so now we're building a company. Correct? Selling gizmos and gadgets to imbeciles. Oh, no, wait, no, we're not doing that anymore. That one was corrupt. What are we selling? Ice cream to handicapped kids. No, we're not selling. We're giving it away to handicapped kids. Fine, we're giving it away. We're a sucker company. We're a loser company. We're giving our stuff away. How are we making money then? We're advertising. We're making money through advertising and networking. Okay, cool. In between today and the realized vision, it's going to be a wilderness experience. The same things that beset the children of Israel in their wilderness experience, same things that I'm going to have to deal with as me building the company. That's why those metaphorical truths have resonance. That's why people care about them. That's why people debate them and discuss them to this day. Intelligent people. Jordan Peterson's not intelligent, Craig. It's all word salad. No, it ain't. Pretty darn sharp. Probably smarter than the person who said that. Honestly, probably a lot smarter than the person who said it. I'd take him over whoever said that sentence any day of the week. So would most of the people listening to me, right? Amen? Amen. No, it's word salad. No, probably not. Honestly, probably not. So, the first thing that happens to them, supplies. Now, this is where I thought people might not know what I was talking about. Manna in the wilderness, in the actual book of Exodus. God provides them with supernatural provision. Moses prays. And the supernatural provision has a caveat. They can only gather it for one day. And then they have to do it again the next day. Now, what does that symbolically, spiritually represent? Just enough to get by. Just enough to get by. So you're building your company. And this will happen if you're building your company. This is how it will go down, I promise you. There will be a period before you're Steve Jobs. And you won't have barely enough to pay your bills. and the roof will be caving in, and your kids are going to need medicine, and your wife is getting mad at you. Where's all the money, Mr. Super Genius? Where's the money? We got to feed our kids. And this is going wrong, and that is going wrong, and you barely have enough to get by, hence you call it a wilderness experience. The key in the book of Exodus is they had just enough to get by. And if you pay attention to your actual experience as the builder of a company, you'll see that between today and your realized vision, you actually do have enough to get by. You actually do have enough to get by. You wake up the next morning and you start all over again. It's a bit of a Sisyphus experience, but you have enough to get by. And if you're a practicing Christian, you chalk that one up for the faithfulness of God. But you have enough to get by. Either way, the fact that you are paying attention to the fact that you have enough to get by, and you're paying attention, to the fact that you are getting by the next morning and focusing on your goal, keeps you heading in the right direction towards the promised land. Now, in other parts of the Bible, they have really specific advice about how you succeed in these trials and tribulations. Set your face like a flint towards Jerusalem. I'm going to build this company, and this is what God spoke to me, and I'm going to build this company. I'm not going to take no for an answer, and God is going to provide. And like I said, as I quoted from Henry Ford, if you believe you can, you believe you can't, you are right. Lot stronger position. Not talking about debating in a YouTube channel with some smart aleck atheist. Lot stronger position in life. Lot stronger position in life itself. If you are actually trying to build a company and you honestly have some sort of sense that you're destined to do it, you're going to be better at it. And you honestly believe that God is going to provide for you just enough to get by. Both the practicing atheist and the practicing Christian are probably going to experience just enough to get by. But there's a lot better odds that the practicing Christian who really feels it's God's will is going to fulfill it to its end. That's just basic reality of human nature. That's just a basic reality. But that's what the metaphors are trying to talk about. Actual human experience. Actual life. There's actual life being discussed in the Bible. Actual life. Now, when you go into a chat room or debate, they're isolating certain sections, contested sections. Those aren't questions that are important to life as it's actually lived. They aren't. That's what I'm trying to say. The actual metaphorical truths in the Bible that I talk about, that Peterson talks about, are the actual substance of the text. It's the things that actually get talked about in churches where people are literally trying to hear from God and trying to be informed in their decisions by God. They go to churches and they're actually, the metaphorical truths are the same thing as the spiritual truths. It's what the people are talking about. It's the messages that the good Christian minister is deriving from the text to preach to the congregation. It's the actual substance of the text. It's the actual lifeblood that's inside of it. Jesus said, my words are spirit and they are life. And that's what he meant. There are actual lessons about life in the Bible. That's why it has stood the test of time. They're real, they cut deep, and they're meaningful. And on those particular areas, it's firing on all 5 cylinders. Now, in the contested ground, that's someone who has moved the goalpost. From the obvious, from the genuine spiritual nourishment, to the, here's a weird part. Explain this, reconcile this. And the only reason it survives is because they have adopted the fundamentalist framing. I swear to God, they have. This is somebody mentioned this before, somebody took issue with this. They have. The fact of whether the mustard seed, if you don't know, this is why I got to be careful, because some of you don't know the things I just casually dropped. Okay, one of the disputes of the supposed contradictions in the Bible is Jesus says the mustard seed is the smallest seed in the world. No, it's not. See? No, it's not. Who cares? Nobody. It's fundamentalist framing. Aha, gotcha, Craig. It's not the smallest seed in the world. Hence, everything you just told me about the metaphorical truths of the Old Testament is false. See? See how dumb that is? You see how dumb that is? It's a potentially decent argument against inerrancy, sure. but it's an imbecile's version of what's actually going on in the Bible. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. It really is. It's totally irrelevant. Couldn't be more irrelevant whether the mustard seed is in fact. I remember there was a debate. Someone was debating Matt Dillon, and that was the question that was asked. Is the mustard seed the smallest seed in the world? You know, I would have said, like, God, who cares, man? God, what's up? There's scam artistry involved in that. The person asking the question, fixating the question, smart enough to know better. Now, the Christian's going to participate. I don't think it's wise. I really don't. I really don't. I think you're giving them an excuse. Fundamentalist framing, the problem with it is that it's all or nothing, zero sum. You either believe the earth is 6,000 years old, Jesus rose from the dead, or you believe it's absolute, or there is no God at all. That serves both ends of the spectrum, the hardcore atheist and the hardcore fundamentalist, because it's not offering a middle ground. So you're a secular person, you're an atheist. Here's the middle ground. The Bible is an important book, one of the cornerstones of Western civilization. There are deep metaphorical truths that you can read and learn from and ascertain within the text. And they're really pretty big and obvious. If you fixate on these small little side sections that are the contested ground, you are deliberately mishandling the Bible. Deliberately, quasi-deliberately. You're doing it, you are steering yourself wrong. There's no good reason on earth why anybody can't think of the Bible in Peterson-esque terms. There really isn't. And if you use the fundamentalist framing, you aren't helping, you aren't serving on either end. Because it only routes things into zero sum. I think that was clear. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. It's getting too long. 22 minutes, that's way long enough. It's way long enough. Nobody wants to hear you talk anymore, Craig. That's fine. I'll shut up. That's fine. I'm done. I'm done. But I will come back to metaphorical truth time and time again, because they are the same thing as spiritual truths. And they're actually what gets taught in Christian church. The Christians don't call it metaphorical truths. They call it, what God said, basically. What God said. This is what God said when I read the Old Testament. You're in a wilderness experience, Craig. Keep building This is honestly what a Christian will say to me. This is what I got from this is what I said when I started reading the Old Testament. Craig, you're in a wilderness experience. God said, keep working on your thing. He's faithful. He will provide today and the next day just enough to get by till you make it to the promised land. The metaphorical truth is actually identical to the spiritual truth. It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. So you can broaden these conversations so that they're more intelligent and more inclusive and they don't have to be zero sum. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. That's all I said. That's all I said. That's really all I said. That's all I meant. Anywho. Yeah, long roundabout way of saying that, but whatever. Whatever. What else you got to do? Go watch a debate. I gotta go watch a debate with this person, that person. Okay, whatever. Well, go knock yourself out. That's all for now, kids. Mass is ended. Go in peace. Amen.